We are officially living in the era of the yearning man. From endless TikTok edits of Mr. Darcy's hand flex to continual pleas from audiences to bring back men who pine, it is clear that the people have spoken. And what we want from our romances and our period dramas is a bit of a slow burn and men who yearn. Like myself, a lot of people have noticed that there's been a lack of yearning on our screens for a while now, and complaints that storylines are going too fast. There's too much instant gratification for characters who should be yearning for episodes, maybe seasons even. And the noticeable watering down of storylines and dialogue on streaming platforms like Netflix have left a hollow feeling in audiences that are desperate for men on screen who are emotionally safe but restrained, guarded, and sometimes distant, but who are hyper-focused only on the one they desire. Our current fixation with male yearning might not just be about romance. It might be about what's actually missing in modern masculinity, dating, and even storytelling. In today's media landscape, where rushed storylines and heavy-handed script writing are constantly competing for the attention of viewers scrolling on their phones, true slow burn romance has become a rarity. There's a distinct feeling that when yearning does present itself on screen now, there's a bit of a manipulation or something for some characters. The emotion often feels manufactured for shocking storylines that people can talk about online rather than authentically built through the narrative over time. This creates a really hard balance in shows these days. Just like actors that have that undeniable it factor, there's something about men who yearn that can either send us spiraling into obsession or turn us off entirely. It's a very fine line between earnest longing, burning, and yearning, and the ick. My Southern came out there. We waited years for a third season of Bridgerton. We're promised a season overflowing with intense male yearning, only for so many viewers to report that Colin's character development actually gave them the ick. Yet when something like The Summer I Turned Pretty airs, and we get another childhood friends to lovers plotline, audiences eat it up. The showing of true, slow burn longing is a powerful reminder of just how intoxicating it can be when fiction actually gets it right. Welcome back to Regency Rumors. I'm Kayla, and here on the channel, I talk about period dramas, history, and historical fiction. And today, we're talking about the magic of yearning in fiction. We'll look at how it's been done beautifully in iconic period dramas and rom-coms, and how, when it's mishandled with underdeveloped characters, it can completely disrupt the female gaze and give us the ick. So quick note, there's a companion video coming to this one, a recommendation list of the best underrated period dramas with irresistible male yearning. So check that out because I go into much more detail on some of the characters that I mention today. Also, if you enjoy this video, I'd really appreciate it if you could subscribe, comment, use that new hype feature to help small channels like mine become more visible. Love you, period drama besties. So first up, what exactly is male yearning? People are going to have different definitions, but to me, it's an archetype in fiction. It's a man who loves, admires, and pines. He's captivated by intellect, by confidence, by steadfastness, and he longs for as long as it takes, regardless of the obstacles. And crucially, he is not interested in anyone else in this fictional world. There is, of course, Mr. Darcy pining for Elizabeth and already being rejected from a proposal. There's Gabriel Oak in Far From the Madding Crowd, waiting for Bathsheba even though she's married in a time when divorce was basically non-existent or really hard to get. Or the newer Artful Dodger on Disney Plus and the class divide between the couple. If you have not seen that show, go do it. They are playing the long game with the yearning in that show. It's not another remake. It's a continuation story of one of the side characters in Charles Dickens' Oliver Twist, and it's got the feel of some of the 2000s period dramas that we love. I've included it in the period dramas that I'm most excited about in 2026 video. It's out right now. Season 2 is out right now. Go check it out. There's been a lot of discourse lately about how the female gaze is fundamentally different from the male gaze. It has less to do with specific camera shots of body parts and much more to do with vibes, with connection, with backstory. Now, I am going to be speaking in generalizations today, so please don't bean soup me. I know not all women feel this way, and not all male characters fit in these boxes. But in order to talk about this as more of a trend, we need to paint a bit of a broad stroke. The female gaze is about attention over objectification. It prioritizes long-term kindness and intelligence and devotion and protectiveness. Look, do soaked white shirts and cheeky little glasses also work on the female gaze? Absolutely. But that's just a bonus. At the end of the day, it's about the person inside, as cheesy as that sounds. The female gaze isn't about the external transformation. It's about the internal one. Bridgerton is back. And the internet is buzzing once again about Yearning from the Bridgerton boys in the fantastical Regency world. Looking back at season 3, why did Colin Bridgerton's version of Yearning give so many viewers the ick, especially when compared to the chokehold Anthony Bridgerton and Simon Bassett had in earlier seasons? So it all comes down to the setup. The thin line between yearning and the ick is entirely dependent on how the longing is framed within the narrative and the backstory of the people who yearn. When Simon yearned for Daphne, his restraint was rooted in deep internalized trauma. He believed he was protecting her from his own perceived brokenness. We swooned because his yearning was an act of tragic, protective self-sacrifice. When Anthony Bridgerton yearned for Kate Sharma, it was the ultimate battle of duty versus desire, rooted in profound, mirrored trauma. They had very parallel storylines that connected them. They had both lost a father figure and been forced to prematurely step up as the head of their respective family units. Anthony isn't just pining for Kate because she's beautiful, though, obviously she is. He's yearning for someone he fundamentally understands and who understands his situation. He sees her struggles. He recognizes her sacrifices, and he admires her priorities because he feels the same. Unlike the other debutantes pretending to be something they aren't just to snag a husband, Kate's sole focus is protecting her sister and doing the right thing, which perfectly aligns with Anthony's own driving force in life. The true connection between them comes from that deep mutual understanding. Because of this, his yearning builds slowly over time. By the time he finally breaks, she's become the object of all his desires, because that built-up time of seeing exactly who she is meant that there is simply nothing else that he could want. There's nobody else that would be in his eye line, because she, by this time, by all the built-up yearning, now means everything to him. That absolute singularity is the definition of yearning for the female gaze. And it's exactly why his restraint felt so desperate and real for that season, as opposed to kind of the puppy love he had for his mistress in season 1. But then we get to Colin, and I'm not trying to be mean, because Colin and Penelope were my favorite characters, or are my favorite characters in Bridgerton. On paper, Colin is supposed to be the ultimate yearner out of the three of them. A yearner for life because Colin is a wife guy. Season 3 builds a pollen arc, moving from a long friendship to a sudden awakening, culminating in intense pining and that famous carriage confession. The issue with Colin's setup, however, is that the obstacles keeping him from Penelope were largely self-inflicted and rooted in a lack of self-awareness. For years, Colin friend-zoned Penelope, overlooked her, publicly humiliated her. When he finally does start yearning, it feels less like a tragic, noble restraint and more like a guy who just realized that the girl he ignored is actually attractive now, that somebody else wants her. And worse, his actions in the meantime completely undercut his devotion and his building yearning for her. To compensate for his sudden feelings, the show had him adopt this kind of performative, rake-like persona that felt entirely unnatural to his core personality. He became an image-focused makeover mentor who flirted broadly and performed desirability for the rest of the ton, undermining the trope's promise of singular, unwavering focus. The ultimate breaking point for the audience was showing Colin going to brothels, almost right up until he proposes to Penelope. Some people will argue that this is a necessary part of his growth, that, he's lying to himself about being a rake because that is what society expects of him. But that justification entirely misses the point. We still do not want to see that on screen. Watching those explicit actions completely breaks the emotional bond of him finally falling for Penelope, making his sudden devotion feel cheap, especially when she's been the one pining for so long on the flip side. And the fact we had his pining over just like maybe an episode and a half, really, compared to the seasons before, it felt extra rushed. Imagine how it would have felt if we saw Anthony going to a brothel right before sparring with Kate in that closed room. It would have immediately given us the ick. When a character is supposed to be entirely consumed by someone, chasing other physical connections makes it feel like they have a divided focus in fiction. I know it happens in the real world a lot, but in fiction, we really don't like to see it. The devotion of trying to figure out why a woman is driving you mad is instantly broken when we see a character actively pursuing other people, which is why the whole mistress storyline is abandoned for Anthony in his actual season. We can't have him getting another mistress while he's pining for Kate. Having a past or implied physical connection is one thing on screen, but explicitly having characters in romance-adjacent media have sexual escapades shatters the fantasy contract of the female gaze, I believe. To me, this is why the critical reception to Colin and Penelope's season was so incredibly split. While some viewers praised his soft version of Yearning, others felt the romance was the weak link of the season, suggesting the script talked about devotion, while, his behavior read as entirely performative. It feels late and reactive rather than a natural progression for their characters. We need to believe that a character's longing is tearing them apart from the inside out. And if their actions in any way contradict that setup, that leads to us cringing. This is also why I think we are significantly less bothered by Benedict being an absolute rake as we head into his own season. We all know his history, and we fully expect him to be exploring his freedom before he meets Sophie. But the crucial difference is that the show intentionally does not have him continue those explicit actions with other people after that connection is made. So I just wanted to add a quick note now that I've seen the new season 3 of Bridgerton, that this is exactly why Madame Delacroix is noticeably missing from the upcoming season, reminding the audience of Benedict's past physical and emotional attachment to the modiste would completely distract from his new storyline, undercutting the singular devotion he needs to have for Sophie. So that's an example where obviously he's had a past and we're fine with it as an audience. But now that Sophie's in the mix, even having Madame Delacroix, even though they've moved on from one another, I think they didn't even have an attachment in season 3, that still would be a visual reminder of him having some sort of feelings for someone else. So having her not even be in this season makes sure that it doesn't detract from him and Sophie's connection. Honestly, I think this was a massive deliberate course correction for this season. The writers seem to have realized that to truly sell Benedict's Yearning for the Lady in Silver, they had to cut the physical distractions the second that she entered the picture. It proves that audiences can absolutely handle a male character having a promiscuous past, just as long as that behavior stops the moment that the true yearning begins. Realize not everyone is as chronically online as I am and might not know these terms. So I am going to separate these characters into 2 distinct groups: the black cat boyfriend and the golden retriever boyfriend. Obviously, these are just like silly internet terms for fictional men, not deep academic theory, but honestly, I do feel like they're a good shorthand to explain exactly why one character's yearning feels feels incredibly sincere and intoxicating to us as an audience, while another's just feels hollow and gives us the ick. So quickly, the internet have coined these terms. So golden retriever boyfriends are the type that are very loving, they're best friend types. Sometimes they're kind of the friend to lovers. They can be the nerdy next door neighbor types. They're unthreatening things. Sometimes they can be the comedic sidekick type. And then black cat boyfriends are your kind of more typical mysterious bad boy types, where really inside, they have a heart of gold, but they can sometimes be a bit mysterious and they can be distant and they're, a really cool bad boy on the outside. The internet loves to categorize fictional men into, the golden retriever and the black cat boyfriends. But when it comes to the female gaze and the concept of yearning, between you and me, one of these archetypes gives us the ick way more than the other. When characters like Mr. Thornton from North and South, or even Edward Cullen from Twilight, yearn and transform because of it, it can become intoxicating for us to watch. By contrast, characters like Colin Bridgerton, Jeremiah Fisher, or Tamlin from A Court of Thorns and Roses also yearn, but it doesn't result in the same adoration from the audience. Why is that? I think in part it's because we inherently mistrust golden retriever boyfriends and wife guys due to real life examples. On the surface, the golden retriever boyfriend is marketed as the nice guy, safe option. He's affectionate, he's bubbly, he's fiercely loyal, he's dependable. He's not this mysterious bad boy that plays games with your heart. He's the guy with the puppy dog eyes who openly worships his partner. But as we see with this wife guy trend, this overt devotion can sometimes act as a mask. Over the last few years, high-profile internet wife guys like Ned Fulmer or Adam Levine have repeatedly lured the public into a false sense of security about their relationships and their supposedly, unwavering devotion to their wives. Fans have seen these massive idealized narratives around their unending love, and in the past have labeled them as goals or, couple vibes, only for the facade to eventually come crashing down in some sort of public scandal. I feel like this is a cycle that happens with celebrity culture in different generations, where a whiplash has built a deep cultural distrust of these overly performative, relentlessly loving and adoring men, and it bleeds into how we view characters on screen. And then obviously, we've been trained to suspect that if a man's devotion seems a little too loud, a little too performative, or just simply too good to be true, a lot of times it is. Beneath the sweetness and dependability, there is also a potential for insincerity or control, or like a manipulation of his public image, or a manipulation of the person that he is pursuing. We see this reevaluation of golden retrievers and audiences happening with older TV shows. So I'm thinking of something like Ross Geller from Friends. In a lot of ways, he was presented to audiences as the ultimate nice guy who earnestly yearned for Rachel across multiple seasons. But modern audiences have taken a look back at that dynamic and see him in a completely different light. Yeah, he pines for her, but his version of yearning is also deeply selfish. He's consistently wishy-washy to the other women who are actually willing to commit to him, treating them as disposable placeholders. He's constantly guilt-tripping Rachel, and when his pride takes a hit, he acts out in incredibly selfish ways, most notably by immediately sleeping with someone else and hiding behind the excuse that they were on a break. And no, I'm absolutely not getting into a fight about that specific storyline in the comments, because we would literally be here for days. But the point is, just because a character is framed as sweet and dependable and a guy who, waits for the girl, does not mean that his devotion is wholly good. Sometimes that nice guy yearning just masks a profound sense of entitlement and control. Now, obviously, this isn't an exact science with these crazy names, but when done right, golden retrievers are beloved. So let's say Jem Halpert from The Office, or Peeta Mellark from The Hunger Games, or Edward Ferrars from Sense and Sensibility. So on the flip side, black cat boyfriends, these names. Anyways, they can be incredibly toxic. The Mr. Rochesters locking wives in the attic and lying about being married, Kylo Ren committing galactic ocide, Heathcliff from Wuthering Heights, and don't even get me started on what that toxicity looks like now that the new adaptation has finally dropped. When I think of Black Cat boyfriends, I always think of Heath Ledger and 10 Things I Hate About You. Like, he's the ultimate kind of high school version of a Black Cat boyfriend. Yet, for some weird reason, we absolutely go feral for Black Cat boyfriends, oftentimes regardless of how many red flags they have. Whereas golden retrievers get our full wrath if their yearning isn't executed perfectly in fiction. I feel like I'm definitely too old for some of these internet terms. There were endless articles about this like 6 months ago with the Summer I Turned Pretty. The Black Cat boyfriend archetype is far more reserved and mysterious and prickly, but his devotion is incredibly selective and most notably private. So for me, this is how, say, a Mr. Knightley behaves over a Frank Churchill or a Colonel Brandon over a Mr. Willoughby. Because a Black Cat isn't out there charming the entire room, his warmth and vulnerability is reserved solely for his love interest, drastically heightening that feeling of being truly seen and chosen. His restraint reads as genuine thoughtfulness rather than an act, completely avoiding the performative pitfalls of the sometimes love-bombing golden retrievers. There is a reason why Book Talk is obsessed with Black Cat boyfriends as the ultimate, fantasy right now. Even though the whole dark possessiveness thing in some fiction that's coming out, some of the romantasy is just, it's not for me. They represent consistency in a relationship without the exhausting performance. Psychological research even backs this up. Scarcity and selectivity naturally heighten perceived value in attraction. When someone isn't universally affectionate but becomes hyper attentive specifically to you, it instinctively feels more genuine. This is why yearning lands so much better with Black Cat types. When we watch Mr. Darcy's awkward, agonizing restraint, it feels like he's a man who is genuinely struggling under the weight of his own profound depth of feeling. We love the fact that we really can't know what's going on in his head. Then when we look back at Colin Bridgerton season 3, Rake Act, it feels like a golden retriever who tried on a bunch of different shallow identities for the crowd, only to pick devotion to Penelope at the very last minute. In fiction, yearning only really works on an audience when it is well written in very specific ways. At the end of the day, whether you're talking about Black Cat boyfriends or golden retriever boyfriends or rat boyfriends, I'm so glad that phrase is over. The reality is that this level of obsession over male yearning in real life would be incredibly toxic. I feel like we all know that. In a lot of instances, what we're actually romanticizing on screen isn't actually devotion at all. It is straight up limerence. Back in the 1970s, psychologist Dorothy Tinoff coined the term limerence to describe an obsessive, idealizing infatuation that completely erases the actual person. While it looks like the ultimate romantic gesture, it can center entirely on the lover's own fantasy and not the actual reality of the person that they are pining after. In real life, this type of all-consuming yearning isn't necessarily an example of being in love with someone. It's being in love with the idealized version of someone that we have built up in our heads. This is why pedestals are not healthy in relationships. Prioritizing your partner, not obsessing over them. We end up romanticizing a man's restraint and pining, which inadvertently rewards emotional distance and mixed signals rather than a healthy balance between couples. In real life, that Black Cat energy can absolutely be a performative choice too. It often is a calculated performance to avoid closeness, intimacy, and vulnerability. There is a deep immaturity in this kind of cool, distant approach to relationships. Is it undeniably exciting in fiction? Yes. But in reality, oh my gosh, while we love the idea of a bad boy, nobody actually has time for that level of foolishness, especially once you become an adult. Like now that I'm in my 30s, I just think about dealing with those types of guys and I'm instantly exhausted. Like it is time for bed. Let's put on Murder, She Wrote and call it a day. I also feel like now that I'm older and we are living in the economy that we're living in, I've totally changed my mind about some of the characters that I watched in like period dramas growing up. I'm like, girl, why don't you give that man a chance? I know he's a bit boring compared to the other guy over here, but he's got money and he's stable and he's sweet and he's nice. Now that I'm older, I'm like, girl, that older man, you'll be eating hot food with him. You'll be riding in a closed carriage. Yearning is intoxicating in fiction because we have the safety of a guaranteed happy ending and an author, controlling the narrative in romances. Men who start out distant and maybe a little toxic, they learn and grow, which does not always happen in life. So what does healthy yearning actually look like? Honestly, probably like nothing in any of these stories. They are addicting to watch, but in reality, couples like Claire and Jamie from Outlander would be one of the most toxic couples that you know. If Claire was your real life friend, you would be pulling her aside to tell her she had to stop going back in time for this man. There is no man, no matter how long and blonde and flowy his hair is, no matter how Scottish his accent is, no matter how big his calves look in a kilt, you cannot convince me it's worth giving birth in the 1700s or getting tortured as a witch or getting essayed and pulled by knife point and all the things that happened in that show and those books over and over again. You cannot tell me. I'm sorry. I know he's a beautiful man, but you couldn't pay me. I'm so sorry. I'm totally that TikTok where the wife is complaining about men to her friend on the phone while her husband wraps her up in a blanket and brings her a cup of tea and like serves her dinner and like makes sure that she's comfortable. The positive aspect of fictional yearning in men, the core of why we love it for the female gaze, is that it represents a woman being well and truly seen by a man. Healthy yearning shows a concrete respect for a woman's intellect, her choices, and her work, let's say, not just her beauty. That's why I feel like there can be such a disconnect between the male and female gaze in scripting decisions, like sending Colin Bridgerton to a brothel in season 3. From a male gaze, a traditional screenwriting perspective on a male, sending a character to a brothel seemed like a logical way to show his rock bottom. The thought process is to show him engaging in meaningless physical acts with other women so the audience can see how empty his life is without Penelope. But that does the exact opposite of what the female gaze wants. It creates massive division because female audiences fundamentally do not want to see the hero's physical acts with other partners on screen. It does shatter that fantasy contract of a singular, unwavering attention. So compare that to Conrad Fisher in The Summer I Turned Pretty. We know Conrad is a popular teenager and has a life outside of Belly, but the show doesn't force us to watch his sexual escapades with other girls. The narrative protects his devotion, focusing his screen time on his emotional fixation with Belly, which is exactly why his yearning feels intoxicating instead of icky. So why are we so obsessed with this trope right now? I think our current fixation on male yearning is ultimately a form of cultural repair, because in a lot of ways, it is kind of making these male characters have to be more perfect than they would be in real life. After centuries of media built entirely around the objectification of women, which, let's be honest, has become exhausting to constantly watch, audiences are desperately seeking stories where characters are deeply and comprehensively seen. We're seeing vulnerability and softness treated as deeply attractive qualities rather than weaknesses. This is exactly where we find that razor-thin line between intoxicating yearning and the ick. True yearning reads like a corrective to a culture of instant gratification and swipe culture dating. But the second it feels like somebody's cosplaying devotion, then the spell breaks. When a character performs longing while simultaneously seeking status with their peers or sexual capital elsewhere, we instantly get the ick. I'm watching Love is Blind right now, and let me tell you, you see it all the time in these people that go on these shows. They are way more concerned with how getting in these relationships could look for them to the outside world on social media, to the other people on the show, than they really are about creating a long-term commitment. And while it can be fun to watch that in reality TV, we don't really want to see it in our fiction. There's a reason the great love stories written 250 years ago still stand the test of time today. Their universal appeal isn't about who looked the hottest on screen. It's about the profound, radical act of truly knowing another person and defying cultural conventions to be together. To be loved is to be seen. And that is the real version of yearning. Well, that is it for me, guys. What do you guys think? Is there a line where yearning officially crosses into the ick for you? And what characters completely ruined the trope for you? Let me know down in the comments, because I want to read all of your historical yapping on this subject. Don't forget to check out the companion video to this one, my list of the best underrated period dramas with irresistible male yearning, to add some new shows and films to your watch list. My favorite yearner of all time is John Thornton in North and South. Oh my gosh, the yearning. I would do a whole video about him and his look back at me speech. And her carriage is riding off and he's looking and he's like, look back at me. Look back at... I can't. Okay, I gotta go. Okay, bye.